They called her cursed long before she was old enough to understand what curses were. At first, Elara thought it was just a word adults used when they were tired, the same way they said winter was cruel, or wolves were hungry, or the old forest was haunted. She thought cursed meant inconvenient, unlucky, a thing people sighed about and moved past. She learned better at 13, on the night the village priestess pressed 2 fingers to the center of her chest and closed her eyes for a long, terrible time. The whole village had gathered in the chapel because every child of Black Hollow was tested when they came of age. Some were found with healing gifts, some with hunter's senses, some with a stronger pulse of blood magic that marked them for higher houses farther north. Every year, families waited in dread and hope to find out whether their children would rise or remain ordinary. When the priestess opened her eyes, she stepped back from Elara as though she had touched a hot stove. "There is nothing," she said. The words rippled through the chapel. Nothing. No gift. No blessing. No line of power. No glow in the blood. No protection of the old saints. Nothing. Her mother cried. Her father did not. He only looked at her once, with an expression so blank it was somehow worse than anger, then turned away as though the matter had already been settled inside him. By morning, Elara had been moved out of the family room and into the back quarters near the smokehouse. By the end of the month, her younger cousins had been warned not to sit too close to her at meals. By winter, people had stopped saying her name when she entered a room, and by spring, they had started calling her cursed where she could hear it, not because she brought disease, not because crops failed around her, not because animals bit her or mirrors cracked. No, Black Hollow was a practical village. They did not fear spectacle. They feared uselessness. A girl with nothing in her blood was a burden. A mouth. A body that would need feeding through winter. A reminder that not every family was favored by fate. So Elara grew up the way neglected things grow, quietly, in corners, with very little sunlight and a stubborn instinct for survival. By 19, she worked where no one else wanted to work. Root cellars, ash pits, the back kitchen after slaughtering days, the old chapel steps after funerals. She washed blood out of aprons and soot off floorboards and listened to people speak around her as if she had already faded into furniture. And every night after the village lamps went out and the forest became one continuous wall of black, Elara stole half a heel of bread from the kitchen and walked to the abandoned stone well behind the church. That was where she kept the bat. The first time she found it, she thought it was dead. It lay in the snow beside the well, one wing twisted wrong, its little body trembling so hard, the frost beneath it shook. Black Hollow children sometimes threw stones at bats in summer. They said creatures of the night belonged to monsters, and anything that served monsters deserved what it got. Elara had crouched beside it in the dark, lantern swinging from her hand, and felt something inside her chest pull tight. The bat's eyes had been open, not wild, not vicious, just hurt. "I know," she whispered, though she did not know why she said it. "I know." She should have left it there. That would have been the sensible thing. Nature finished what weakness began. Black Hollow believed that. Most people did. Instead, she wrapped the bat in the corner of her shawl and hid it in the old well house, where the stone still held a little warmth from summer. She stole a cracked bowl from the kitchen, dripped goat's milk into it, and returned the next night with bread softened in broth she pretended to spill. Then the next night. Then the next. The bat did not die. Its wing healed slowly, awkwardly. Its body remained small, too thin for too long, but its eyes sharpened. It began to recognize her footsteps. It would pull itself from the straw in the corner and climb clumsily toward her hand the moment she knelt down. "You're ugly," Elara told it one night, voice soft in the dark. "And rude. And probably the reason I'll be accused of consorting with demons if anyone sees you." The bat blinked. She smiled despite herself. "So I suppose we understand each other." That was the closest thing to friendship she had known in years. No one touched her gently in Black Hollow. No one waited for her. No one brightened at the sound of her arrival. But the bat did. And for a girl who had spent most of her life moving through rooms like a shadow, that was enough to feel dangerous. The night everything changed began with punishment. Mistress Vey, who ran the village kitchens with the discipline of a military commander and the mercy of a rusted blade, caught Elara pocketing a scrap of beef fat after supper. "For the dogs?" Vey asked. Elara lowered her eyes. "Yes. There are no dogs that far behind the church." The kitchen had gone silent. Steam curled from the broth pot. A ladle dripped onto the floorboards in slow red taps. Two servant boys pretended very hard not to listen. Mistress Vey stepped closer and yanked open Elara's apron pocket. A stale crust, a strip of dried meat, and a little linen bundle of herbs fell to the floor. Not enough food to save a life. Too much to explain away. Vey's mouth thinned. "You steal from the kitchen now. I was going to pay it back." "With what?" Elara had no answer. Of course she didn't. People like Elara were always promising future repayment for present survival. It was one of the many things the village despised about the poor. By midnight, punishment had been decided. She was sent to the crypt beneath the old chapel to scrub the bloodstones. No one in Black Hollow liked the crypt. It predated the village by centuries, built when the North belonged to older powers and older fears. The stones below the chapel were always damp, always cold, and always carried the faint copper smell of something that had seeped into them long ago and never truly left. Villagers said the first founders of Black Hollow had hidden there during vampire raids, and the walls still remembered. Elara was given a brush, a bucket, and one guttering candle. "Scrub until dawn," they said. "Maybe honest labor will cure whatever filth is growing in you." The crypt stairs were narrow and slick with age. Elara descended carefully, the candle throwing weak gold against the stone. Water sloshed against her leg with every step. Somewhere below, the dark seemed to breathe. She hated the crypt, not because she believed the stories, because the place felt abandoned in the wrong way, not empty, waiting. At the bottom, she set down the bucket and stood still until her pulse slowed. Rows of old recesses lined the walls, some filled with crumbling bones, some sealed with carved slabs worn smooth by time. The floor was marked with ancient sigils the village no longer understood. Dark stains spread between the stones like old maps. Elara knelt and dipped the brush into the water. The first stroke turned the water pink. "Of course it did," she muttered. Her voice sounded too loud down there. She worked in silence after that. Brush, scrub, rinse, repeat. The candle burned lower. Cold crept into her hands until her knuckles ached. Then she heard it. A flutter. Soft. Erratic. Close. Elara turned sharply, candle raised. Her bat clung to the edge of a cracked burial niche, one wing half spread, little claws scraping stone. It should not have been here. She had left it safe in the well house less than an hour ago. "What are you doing?" she whispered. The bat launched itself badly, clipped the wall, and landed against her shoulder in a panic tangle of claws and wings. She caught it against her chest before it fell. Its whole body was trembling, not with injury, with fear. Then something moved in the dark beyond the candlelight. A figure stepped out of the far end of the crypt with the kind of silence that belonged to predators and nightmares. Elara rose too quickly and nearly slipped. The candle shook in her hand. Wax spilled over her fingers, hot and useless. The man was tall, taller than any man in Black Hollow had a right to be. He wore black wool and darker leather, travel-stained but impossibly fine. His hair fell loose to his shoulders, black as wet ink. His face looked less handsome than carved. Sharp cheekbones, hard mouth, pale skin stretched over a stillness that did not belong to the living. He was not old. He was something worse, timeless. And his eyes. His eyes were a deep, impossible red, dark as garnets held to fire. The bat on her shoulder made a tiny sound and burrowed into the hollow of her neck. The stranger's gaze dropped to the creature, then to the food crumbs in her apron pocket, then to her hands, raw and reddened from scrubbing old blood out of old stone. When he spoke, his voice was low and beautiful and wrong in a way that made every fine hair along her arms rise. "You fed him." It was not a question. Elara's throat worked once before sound came. "I found him hurt, and you kept returning." She should lie. She knew she should. Anyone standing in a crypt after midnight with eyes like that was either death itself or one of death's favored servants. But Elara had been looked down on for so many years that fear no longer made her eloquent. It made her honest. "Yes." "Why?" The bat pressed harder beneath her chin. Elara swallowed. "Because he was hungry." For one long second the man did not move at all. Then he stepped forward and the air in the crypt changed. Not colder, denser, as if the dark itself recognized him and made room. The candle flame bent toward him. Elara's back met the stone wall. Up close he was even less human. Not monstrous, not visibly. That would have been easier. No fangs bared, no claws. No dramatic flare of violence, just perfection sharpened past comfort. A face no illness had ever touched. Hands too steady. A stillness too complete. The unbearable sense that every pulse in the room belonged to her and none belonged to him. His gaze lifted to hers, and for a single terrifying moment, she forgot how to breathe. "You are afraid," he said softly. She almost laughed. "Should I not be?" Something flickered in his expression, not amusement, not exactly. Most humans scream first. Most humans are wiser than I am. That, astonishingly, earned a pause. His eyes dropped again to the bat. The little creature, which had hidden from every villager in Black Hollow for weeks, now stretched one wing toward the stranger with a faint chirping noise that sounded suspiciously like relief. Elara stared. "You know him," she said. The stranger's gaze returned to her face. "He knows me." The answer landed in her body before it reached her mind. Not priest, not traveler, not soldier. Vampire. Every story Black Hollow had ever whispered by the fire unfolded at once behind her eyes. Lords in mountain castles, night riders crossing snow with no hoofprints left behind. Villages emptied for defiance, bargains signed in blood, beautiful monsters who could smell fear beneath skin. Her fingers tightened around the candle. "Are you here to kill me?" He looked at her for so long she felt the question becoming something else between them. Finally he said, "No." It should not have comforted her. It did. He reached out slowly, giving her time to flinch if she wanted to. She should have. Instead, she stood frozen as his hand came beneath the bat and lifted it gently from her shoulder. The creature settled into his palm at once. Elara stared at the tenderness in that impossible hand and felt her understanding of the world shift one careful inch. "You set his wing," the stranger said. "I tried. It healed clean." She wet her lips. "I've mended birds before. Not like this." There was something in the way he said it that made her chest tighten. "You came for him?" she asked. "I came because something I lost crossed half the valley carrying your scent." Before she could make sense of that, footsteps thundered above. Voices. Torches. The chapel hatch slammed open and light spilled down the stairs in violent orange waves. "Down there!" someone shouted. Mistress Vey's voice rose sharp with outrage. "I told you she was hiding something." Elara went cold. The stranger did not turn. 3 men descended first, village guards with spears they barely knew how to use. Behind them came Father Oren, white-faced and clutching a silver icon. Mistress Vey followed with the rigid triumph of a woman proven right. And behind them all came Aldrich Dane, the village reeve, broad-shouldered and self-important, wearing authority like armor. They stopped halfway down the stairs. The crypt swallowed their courage almost instantly. Mistress Vey saw the man in black, saw the bat in his hand, saw Elara pinned between stone and shadow. Whatever speech she had prepared died in her throat. Father Oren made the sign against evil. Aldrich recovered first. "Who are you?" The stranger turned then, very slowly, and the crypt seemed to recoil around him. Red eyes met torchlight. Every man on the stairs forgot his next breath. "Elian Vero," he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Names carried weight. Some names carried history. And in the north, there were old names. Mothers still used to frighten children into obedience long after the houses themselves had become myth. Elian Vero was one of them. Lord of the Nightkeep, master of the northern passes, the vampire lord who had not crossed south in person in nearly 2 decades because he had never needed to. Aldrich's spear lowered without his permission. "My lord." Now it was fear speaking. Good, honest fear. The kind built into bone. Mistress Vey went pale enough to vanish into the wall. Father Oren's silver icon trembled in his hand, and Elara, who had spent the last 6 years being ordered, ignored, dismissed, and blamed by everyone in the room, suddenly understood that the most powerful person in Black Hollow was no longer Aldrich Dane. It was the man standing 3 feet away from her, holding a wounded bat like it was something precious. Aldrich found enough courage to try authority anyway, which was how powerful men so often announced they had stopped understanding the room. "If this creature is yours," he said carefully, "the girl stole from village stores to harbor it. She trespassed in sacred ground. She consorted in secret. We were about to decide punishment." The silence that followed was exquisite. Elian looked at Aldrich the way a man might look at a stain on his sleeve. "You were about to decide," he repeated. Aldrich swallowed. Elian's gaze drifted to Elara's raw hands, her damp skirt, the brush by the bucket, the old blood on the stones. Then to Mistress Vey. "You sent her here." Vey opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "You sent her alone," he said, and this time the crypt itself seemed to listen. No one answered. The bat in his hand climbed neatly to his shoulder and settled there. Elian took 1 step toward the stairs. Every guard moved back, not because he threatened them, because something older than thought told them to. When he spoke again, his voice was soft. That made it worse. This girl has been feeding one of my blood-bound messengers with food she could not spare. She bound his wing, kept him warm, returned night after night when leaving him would have been easier and safer, and you put her on her knees in a crypt to scrub old blood from stone. No one in Black Hollow had ever heard their cruelty described aloud by someone stronger than them. It changed the air. People shifted, looked away. For the first time in years, shame had entered the village wearing a lord's face. Aldrich tried to stand straighter. My lord, the girl is no one. She has no gift, no standing, no. The next second happened so quickly Elara barely understood it. One moment Elian stood at the foot of the stairs. The next he was halfway up them, one hand around Aldrich's throat. Not crushing, not yet, just holding. Aldrich's boots left the stone. The torches guttered madly. The guards stumbled backward. Father Oren dropped his icon with a clatter. You should choose your next words, Elian said, with extraordinary care. Aldrich made a choking sound. Elian's eyes did not leave his face. She is the reason your church still has a roof, he went on. The reason your old mothers eat hot broth in winter. The reason Mistress Vay's stores are cleaner than her conscience. The reason half your children survived fever 2 winters ago. Because someone sat up through the nights changing cloths while the blessed and gifted slept. Elara went very still. No one had said those things. No one had noticed. Elian had. How do you? She whispered, then stopped. He heard her anyway. Without looking back, he said, I know what moves in my territory. I know who suffers in silence. I know what kind of village punishes kindness because it cannot profit from it. Then he lowered Aldrich back onto the stair. The reeve nearly collapsed. I did not come tonight to rule Black Hollow, Elian said, but I will, if forced. No one doubted him. He turned and descended the stairs again, slower this time. When he reached Elara, the fury in him did not vanish. It narrowed, became something colder and more controlled. What is your name? He asked. Elara. The word came out thin. Elara, he repeated, and the simple act of hearing her name spoken like it mattered nearly undid her. Come here. She hesitated, not because she feared him most, because no one in her world had ever called her toward safety before. He must have seen the confusion on her face because something in his expression changed. A minute shift. Not softness, exactly, but restraint wrapped around care. You are not in trouble, he said. Her eyes burned suddenly. That was all it took. Not praise, not rescue, just a sentence no one had ever bothered to give her. You are not in trouble. Elara moved. She stopped at his side, still shaking. Elian lifted his cloak from one shoulder and draped it around her without asking. It smelled of snow, cedar, and some deeper nocturnal scent she had no name for. The fabric was heavy and warm, warm enough to feel unreal. Behind them, Aldrich found his voice through bruised pride. My lord, with respect, she belongs to Black Hollow. Elian went still in a way that made everyone else wish he hadn't. Then he looked at Elara. Do you? The question should have been simple. Instead, it opened something deep and buried and aching inside her chest. Did she belong to Black Hollow? To the rooms that went quiet when she entered? To the people who counted her as nothing unless work needed doing? To the chapel that pronounced her empty? To the kitchen that punished hunger? To a life spent apologizing for taking up space? Her answer came before fear could stop it. No. The word barely rose above a whisper. It landed like prophecy. Elian nodded once, as if confirming something he had known the moment he stepped into the crypt. Then she does not. Aldrich's face darkened. A village cannot simply release. Elian's gaze cut across him like a blade. Release? No. You misunderstand. This is not a negotiation. This is correction. He turned to Father Oren. The records of Black Hollow. Bring them. The priest blinked. Now. Now. No one argued with him again. What followed unfolded the way disasters often did. Not loudly, but with a sickening inevitability. The records were brought from the chapel office. Ledgers, family registries, old blessing rolls tied in cracking ribbon. Elian read them with terrifying speed, one pale hand turning pages while the bat on his shoulder watched the room like a tiny black witness. And then he found it. A single page from 6 years earlier. A notation beside Elara's name. Status revised. Unblessed, non-inheriting. No claim to family holding. No village protection obligations beyond subsistence labor. Elian read the line twice, then very carefully set the ledger down. Aldrich, seeing nothing, mistook silence for opportunity. As you can see, my lord, she remains under village. No, Elian said. The word was quiet. Aldrich stopped. This says the village denied her inheritance, denied her protection, denied her family claim, and reduced her legal standing to labor in exchange for food. Elian lifted his eyes. You stripped her of belonging for convenience and now invoke belonging for control. The Reeves said nothing. Father Oren stared at the floor. Mistress Vey began to cry soundlessly, which was somehow less moving than she probably intended. Elian placed one finger on the page. By your own record, Elara of Black Hollow is not protected by your household law, not claimed by any bloodline, and not secured by any sacred bond, which means she stands unclaimed under the old Northern Accords. His voice cooled further, which means she falls under my protection the moment I choose it. Understanding spread through the crypt like spilled oil catching fire. Aldrich actually staggered, because pride had done what violence could not. It had written the words that freed her. Elara stared at the page and felt the world tilt under her feet. All these years she had thought those records proved she was less. Now, in the hands of something stronger than the village, they became proof that Black Hollow had no right to keep her. Elian extended his hand toward her. Come with me. 3 words, no grand speech, no dramatic promise. Just an offer stated with such certainty it sounded like fate remembering itself. Elara looked at his hand, pale, steady, inhuman, then at the faces behind him. Aldrich furious and frightened, Vey guilty, Father Oren hollow, with the realization that righteousness often arrived too late to be useful. No one there had ever reached for her like she was worth saving. Elara placed her hand in his. The contact hit her like a second heartbeat. Not pain. Not exactly. A shock of warmth in the center of her chest, so sudden and intimate her knees nearly failed. She gasped, and Elian's fingers tightened instantly around hers. His eyes flashed. He felt it too. For one suspended second, the crypt disappeared. There was only that impossible current between them, old as hunger, sharp as winter air, threading through skin and bone and the hidden architecture of blood. Elian went very still. Elara, he said, and her name in his mouth sounded less like discovery than recognition. What was that? She whispered. Something moved behind his face then. Not fear, not surprise. Something deeper, dangerous in a completely different way. "We will speak of it when you are warm," he said. He did not let go of her hand. The journey north began before dawn. Elian had not come alone. Of course he hadn't. Riders waited beyond the tree line, silent and black-clad, mounted on horses too disciplined to snort even in the cold. No banners flew. They did not need banners. Power rarely announced itself twice. Someone had packed Elara's few belongings into a linen sack so small it looked like a cruel joke. 2 dresses, a pair of worn stockings, her mother's comb with half its teeth missing, and a smooth gray stone she had carried in her pocket since the day the chapel declared her empty. Elian noticed the stone when she gripped it in the carriage. "You hold it like a relic." "It reminded me I was real," she said before she could stop herself. He did not answer immediately. Snow blurred the windows. Hooves beat a steady rhythm below. Across from her, the vampire lord sat with his hands folded, motionless in the way only predators and statues could manage. The little bat slept in the dark fur collar of his cloak. Finally, he said, "You should never have needed proof." The carriage fell quiet again, but the warmth in her chest returned, faint and strange, whenever his gaze touched her. By the time they reached Nightkeep, Elara had stopped trying to tell herself this was a dream. Dreams were kinder at the edges. Nightkeep was not. It rose from the mountain like something the rock itself had decided to become in a bad mood. Black towers, narrow windows, bridges spanning drops deep enough to swallow sound. Yet for all its severity, it was not ruined, not haunted, not wild. It was kept. Lanterns burned in iron brackets. Courtyards had been swept clear of snow. Servants moved quietly but without panic. The gates opened before Elian's carriage with the smooth certainty of a place long accustomed to obedience. He led her inside himself, not handed off, not delegated. Inside, heat wrapped around her so abruptly she swayed. The hall was all stone and dark wood and crimson banners, lit by hundreds of candles that made the shadows seem deliberate rather than empty. Somewhere far above, music drifted from another wing. Strings played so softly she almost thought she imagined them. People stared. Of course they did. Their lord had returned without warning, carrying a village girl in his cloak and an intensity in his expression that made even the oldest servants go careful and pale. A woman descended the stair to meet them. She looked perhaps 50, though Elara quickly understood that age meant very little in this house. Her hair was silver, her spine straight, her gaze sharp enough to cut silk. "This is Mira," Elian said. "She governs the inner household." Mira's eyes flicked over Elara once, not dismissive, assessing. Then she bowed, not deeply but unmistakably. "My lord," to Elian. Then, after the smallest pause, "My lady." Elara nearly dropped the stone in her hand. "I'm not," she began. "You are under his protection," Mira said. "That is sufficient for everyone in this keep until told otherwise." There was no mockery in it, no curiosity sharpened into cruelty, just fact. It made Elara's throat ache for reasons she could not have explained. She was taken not to servant quarters, but to a room larger than the entire back space she had slept in at Black Hollow. A fire burned in the hearth. Hot water steamed in a copper tub. Clean clothes had been laid out on the bed in dark wool and cream linen. Elara stood in the doorway and stared. Mira waited politely. "I think there's been a mistake," Elara said at last. Mira's face did not change. "There has. It simply did not happen here." That was when Elara sat down very suddenly on the edge of the bed and cried for the first time since leaving home. Not because she missed Black Hollow, because she didn't, and the body, when it realizes a thing at last, can mistake relief for grief. By evening, the warmth in her chest had become impossible to ignore. It lived just beneath her sternum. Not painful, not pleasant either. A pull, a pulse. A second awareness turning slowly toward the world after a long sleep. Mira summoned the keep physician. Instead, Elian came with him. The physician, a lean man named Cassian with dark eyes and a scholar's hands, examined Elara carefully while Elian stood at the far side of the room pretending distance was the same thing as detachment. It wasn't. Every time Elara winced, something in his expression sharpened. Every time Cassian asked a question about her childhood, Elian grew stiller. "Have you ever felt faint in direct sunlight?" Cassian asked. "No." "Aversion to holy objects?" "No." "Unusual dreams, hearing things no one else hears. Hunger that does not feel like hunger." Elara hesitated. "Yes," she whispered. Cassian glanced at Elian. The room shifted. "What is it?" Elara asked. Cassian folded his hands. "You are not cursed." That landed harder than she expected. Elian looked away briefly, as if the words themselves had claws. Cassian continued, "And you are not empty. In fact, I suspect the opposite. There is old blood in you, Elara. Very old. Dormant, suppressed, perhaps thinned over generations, but not gone." She stared. "That's impossible." "It would be," Cassian said mildly, "if Black Hollow had ever wanted to find the truth." He stepped closer and placed 2 fingers over the point in her chest where the warmth pulsed. The moment he touched her there, the room went colder. Cassian's eyes widened. "Well," he murmured, "that is exceedingly rare." Elian's voice came low from the fire. "Say it plainly." Cassian turned. "She carries night blood." Silence. Elara blinked. "What does that mean?" Cassian's expression had gone from professional curiosity to something approaching awe. "It means somewhere far back in your line, human blood and vampire blood crossed and survived. It means your body has been living all these years with a sealed inheritance no village priestess could read because she was not looking for it. It means your pulse," his eyes lifted to hers, "answers his." He did not need to say who he meant. Elara looked at Elian. He was already looking at her. The air between them thickened. "What happened in the crypt?" she said slowly. "When I touched him." Cassian nodded once. A blood bond recognized itself. "No," Elara whispered. "No. That doesn't happen to girls from kitchens and ash pits." Elian crossed the room then. Not fast, not frighteningly, deliberately. He stopped in front of her chair and knelt so that his eyes met hers. He did not touch her. That restraint, more than anything else, nearly undid her. "It happens," he said. "To the person it happens to." The warmth in her chest surged. Elara pressed a hand there. "Why didn't anyone know?" Cassian's answer was clinical. Elian's silence was not. "Because neglect can bury truth just as effectively as violence," the physician said. "A gift denied often turns inward. A power mocked often goes quiet. If a child is told for long enough that she is nothing, sometimes the blood listens." That sentence entered the room like a knife. Elian's jaw flexed once. Elara stared at her own hand. All those years, all those empty winters, all those chapel walls and whispered curses and lowered eyes. Wrong. All of it wrong. Tears rose so suddenly she hated them. "Does that mean," she said, voice shaking, "that everything they called me, all of it, was a lie?" Elian answered before Cassian could. "Yes. One word. Absolute." No gentling, no hedge, no kindness diluted into comfort, just truth. He looked at her the way a man might look at something broken by other hands and decide with terrifying calm that the world would answer for it. Everything they told you was wrong. She cried then, not delicately, not beautifully, the ugly, shaking kind of crying that belongs to people whose lives were built on falsehood and who have only just discovered it. Elian remained where he was, kneeling in front of her, saying nothing, asking nothing, offering only presence. When her hand slipped from her chest, he took it in both of his and held it as if it were something he intended never to mishandle. That was the moment the bond stopped feeling like danger and started feeling like home. The problem with small villages is that humiliation does not stay small. By the third day, word had reached Nightkeep that Black Hollow was already rewriting the story. Elara had seduced the vampire lord. Elara had trapped him through dark charms. Elara was a thief, a liar, a blood thing pretending to innocence. Aldrich Dane, now very aware he had mishandled an encounter with someone vastly more powerful than himself, had done what weak authorities always do when truth threatens them. He spoke first and loudly. Elian read the report in silence, then folded it once, twice, and said, "Prepare the horses." Elara looked up from the fire with a bat, no longer merely a bat, she realized now, but a blood-bound scout named Sable, slept in her lap. "You're going back." "We are," Elian said. Her pulse skipped. "We?" His gaze met hers. "There are stories that should not be left in the mouths of cruel men." Black Hollow received them at noon. This time Elian did not arrive in silence. The gates opened to black riders and crimson standards, to armored retainers whose discipline alone was enough to make half the village forget how to stand. Snow lifted beneath the horses like breath. The winter sun flashed on steel. Children were dragged indoors. Doors opened a crack, then two cracks, then wider when people realized hiding would not save them from being witnesses. Aldrich stood in the square in ceremonial furs, trying to wear dignity over panic. Father Oren was beside him. Mistress Vey lurked farther back, already looking as though she regretted every choice that had led her here. Elian dismounted first. Then he turned and held out his hand. Elara stepped down from the carriage into the village square, wearing dark wool, fur at her collar, and the quiet shock of good health beginning to return to her face. Sable circled once overhead before settling on the carriage rail. A murmur moved through Black Hollow. Not because she looked grand, because she looked visible. That alone was enough to disturb them. Aldrich recovered first. "My lord, if this is about slander, I assure you no official statement has—" "It is not about slander," Elian said. He stood in the center of the square with his cloak moving in the wind and his red eyes lit by winter noon. He looked like what northern legends had always promised and villagers had always prayed not to see too closely. "It is about truth." He turned, not to Aldrich, but to the people gathering in doorways and under eaves. "Look at her," he said. And because command lived in him differently than in other beings, they did, really looked, at the girl they had trained themselves not to see, at the hands that had washed their dead and fed their sick and scrubbed their floors, at the face they had named cursed because it was easier than confronting their own cruelty. At 19, Elian said, she had less protection in this village than livestock. By your own records, she was denied inheritance, denied family standing, denied village obligation beyond labor for food. Yet now those same records are invoked to claim authority over her. His gaze slid to Aldrich. You stripped her of belonging when belonging cost you something, and you attempt to reclaim it now that it costs you pride. No one in the square moved. Snow drifted quietly between them. Elian went on, voice carrying with unnatural ease. She fed what was wounded when none of you did. She worked where none of you wished to. She kept your burdens from spilling into the roads, your hunger from becoming visible, your old and sick from becoming inconvenient. You called her nothing because gratitude would have required decency. A woman in the crowd started crying, not loudly. The sound of conscience is almost always smaller than people expect. Father Oren bowed his head. Aldrich tried anger as a last defense. She belongs to this village by birth. Elian's expression did not change. Elara, he said without taking his eyes from Aldrich, tell them. She froze. The whole square turned toward her. Old instincts screamed, be quiet, be small, survive. But the warmth in her chest answered, not loudly, not with force, with steadiness. Elara stepped forward. For a moment she saw them all at once as they had always been. Not gods of her childhood, not judges, not final authorities, but frightened ordinary people wrapped in systems that benefited them. The Reeve, the priest, Mistress Vey. Women who had accepted her help without meeting her eyes. Men who had mocked her silence because they mistook gentleness for weakness. Children who learned from all of them. She looked at the chapel, at the kitchen, at the house where she had once lived as family, and later not even as burden, merely as leftover. Then she spoke. I belonged here, she said, and her voice, to her astonishment, carried. I belonged here when I was useful, when I was quiet, when I worked without complaint, when I was cold and hungry and too ashamed to ask for more. I belonged here when I could be spent. A stillness fell over the square so complete it felt built. But I did not belong here when I needed kindness. No one breathed. So no, she said, and this time the word came clear and clean and final. I do not belong to Black Hollow. Something changed in the faces before her then. Not all of them. Some hardened, some looked away, but some, more than she would once have believed possible, looked ashamed. That was enough. Elian stepped beside her. Let it be witnessed, he said. Elara of Black Hollow is under the protection of Nightkeep by the old accords, and by blood right recognized. Any threat against her will be treated as a threat against my house. Aldrich's mouth opened, closed. He had nothing left that could survive daylight. The return to Nightkeep felt different, not because the bond had changed, because Elara had. Something unclenched in her on that journey home, something that had spent years curled tight around humiliation and survival, and the quiet conviction that suffering without complaint was the closest thing to virtue available to unwanted girls. That knot loosened, not all at once. Healing rarely honors drama. But enough. That night she dreamed of a long, dark hall lined with mirrors. In each mirror stood a different version of herself. Child, servant, shadow, cursed girl, silent girl, useful girl, empty girl. She walked past them all. At the end of the hall stood a tall figure in black, waiting beside an open door filled with moonlight. When she reached him, he did not speak. He simply held out his hand. And this time, in the dream, she took it without fear. She woke with his name on her lips. Elian was already in the doorway. She sat up too fast. How did you? He crossed the room in 3 steps. The bond woke me. Her pulse raced. He stopped beside the bed, gaze fixed on her face. You were in pain. I don't think it was pain. The words hung between them. Moonlight silvered the room. The fire had burned low. Sable slept in the window arch, one tiny dark shape against the snow beyond. Elara could feel it again, that second pulse in her chest, that not-human inheritance stirring nearer the surface now that it had been named. Elian must have seen the fear beneath her curiosity. You may ask me anything, he said. So she did. What am I to you? No titles, no evasions, no physician's language, just the question at the center of everything. Elian went very still. Then he sat in the edge of the chair beside her bed instead of the bed itself, as if refusing to take what had not been offered. To my blood, he said slowly, you are recognition. To my house, you are under my protection. To me. He stopped. That alone told her more than any polished answer could have. Elian? His eyes lifted to hers. To me, he said at last, voice lower now. You are the first thing in a very long time that has felt inevitable. Her breath caught. The room became too small for her heartbeat. And if I say I don't know what to do with that, then I wait. No grand seduction, no ancient claim, no demand dressed as destiny, just those two words. Then I wait. Elara felt something inside her settle, not because every fear vanished, because they finally had room to breathe without ruling her. Weeks passed, winter thinned. The keep changed around her the way places do when they decide a person is not temporary after all. Mira stopped asking whether she needed more blankets and simply had them sent. Cassian brought books on old bloodlines and pretended not to notice how often Elara fell asleep over them by the fire. Sable followed her everywhere with the officious devotion of a creature very pleased with his own importance. And Elian remained Elian, controlled, patient, dangerous in all the ways the stories promised. But with her, he learned gentleness like it was a discipline rather than an instinct. He never took for granted that safety, to someone raised without it, could feel as frightening as threat. He stood close only when invited, touched her only after watching her face first, listened when she spoke, even when what she said seemed small, especially then. One evening, as late snow drifted past the high windows, Elara found him in the western gallery staring out over the mountain road. She stood beside him in silence for a while, then said, I used to think being chosen would feel loud. He glanced down. And now? She considered. It feels like being seen. That was when he kissed her. Not quickly, not hungrily. Slowly, like a vow neither of them wanted to break by rushing it. His hand rose to her face and paused there for the smallest fraction of a second, allowing refusal. She gave none. The kiss tasted of winter wine and restraint, and all the words they had not yet learned how to say. When they parted, Elara rested her forehead against his chest and listened. No heartbeat, and yet somehow, no absence either. Only him. Only the strange, impossible fact that some beings were cold to the touch and still managed to feel like warmth. By spring, Black Hollow sent tribute, not because it had grown noble, because it had learned fear properly. Elian accepted the tribute and redirected half of it to widows, laborers, and the children Black Hollow had always counted last. Mira said this was a political message. Cassian said it was efficient justice. Elara suspected it was both. She never returned to live there. She did return once, months later, on a bright morning when the roads had thawed and the old chapel stones smelled of rain. Not for vengeance, for closure. She walked through the square in daylight wearing blue wool and no shame at all. People moved aside for her now. Some bowed. Some could not meet her eyes. Aldrich was no longer Reeve. Father Oren had gone gray. Mistress Vey wept when she saw her and tried to apologize. Elara listened, then forgave her just enough to stop carrying her. That was the difference. Forgiveness did not restore the old life. It simply meant the old life no longer lived in her. That night, back at Nightkeep, she stood on the highest balcony and watched the moon rise over the mountains. Below, lights glowed warm through the windows. Sable darted through the dusk, fully healed, arrogant as ever. Somewhere inside, Mira was arguing with a steward. Somewhere farther down the hall, Cassian was probably losing a battle with ledgers. The keep was alive in its own dark, disciplined way. Yelian came to stand behind her. She knew his presence before he touched her. The bond no longer startled. It hummed, low, steady, woven into her. His arms came around her waist. She leaned back into him, not because she was fragile, and not because he required it. Because trust, she had learned, could be chosen just as deliberately as fear once had been. "The council wants to know whether you'll attend next week's hearing," he murmured. "Will there be old men saying foolish things about bloodlines?" "Almost certainly. Then I should be there." His laugh was soft against her hair. She looked out over the mountains and thought of the girl she had been, the one in the crypt with raw hands and a guttering candle and a bat trembling under her chin. The one who had thought kindness was something you smuggled into the dark because the daylight had no room for it. She wished she could go back and tell that girl one thing. Not that rescue was coming. Not that a lord would see her. Not even that the village was wrong. Something simpler. You were never empty. Inside her chest, the old sealed blood answered with a warm, living pulse. And for the first time in her life, Elara understood that being chosen had nothing to do with suddenly becoming worthy. She had always been worthy. The miracle was only that someone powerful enough had finally told the truth out loud. If this story stirred something in you, don't let it end here. Like the video if Elara's journey hit your heart. Subscribe and turn on the bell for more dark romance tales, forbidden bonds, and stories about the ones the world overlooks until it's too late. And tell me in the comments, what moment stayed with you the most? Until next time, may the night reveal only what is ready to be seen.